Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back up front when you use it to buy a new iPhone 15, AirPods, or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, member FDIC. Terms apply.
I'm Todd Jones, recovering from 30 years as a sports writer. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with some of the best sports writers of our time, who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experienced firsthand some of the biggest sports moments of the past half century. We'll share stories behind the stories, some we've only told each other. Pull up a seat on Press Box Access.
Art Thiel is one of those writers who's become synonymous with a city and a part of the country. If you're a sports fan in Seattle and the surrounding Pacific Northwest, you know Art Thiel. And Art Thiel, well, he knows how to tell a story. He has quite a few of them after nearly 50 years in the business, including 3 decades of writing at the old Seattle Post-Intelligencer. Bill Walton, Ken Griffey Jr., Lou Piniella, Gary Payton. You'll enjoy hearing Art tell tales in his own special way about covering those characters and much more during a career that took him around the globe. Hello, Art. Thanks for joining us on Press Box Access.
I'm thrilled and privileged to be here, Todd. Thanks for asking.
Privilege? I don't know about that. Now, I do want to know, Art, and we're going to talk a lot of different stuff in sports writing. We're going to talk about Seattle, where you've been an institution since 1980. And we're going to go over the world, different events. But I do want to ask you about another bar before we launch. That bar is a place out in the Australian outback during the 2000 Sydney Olympics. Pray tell, what was this all about?
It was a grand experiment in mayhem. And so my accomplice in all this was Woody Page. So
look out.
That tells you right there that this is going to lead to trouble. So Woody and I and a few other folks who've been to multiple Olympics, we always like to try to take a day trip somewhere that isn't anything sports related.
Right.
And so Woody and I decided we would go to the Outback. We're already in Sydney. Why not go somewhere just totally disconnected from the Olympics and just see what we find? Our initial attraction was we found a person at the Sydney Media Center affiliated with the Tourist Bureau who said that she knows a ranger in the Outback who can call kangaroos.
What? We're already off the rails.
You haven't had kangaroos come up in any of your previous interviews, I bet. So we took a flight to Alice Springs, rented a car, and met this ranger at a rendezvous point a little ways out of town. And he says, "How you doing, mates? Let's go." He jumps in his pickup. We're following in the rental car. We go to some completely isolated, desolate place, sand and scrub trees and whatever, rolling hills. And we stop. And he gets out of the back of his, gets out and looks into the back of his pickup truck and pulls out 2 or 3 bags of Wonder Bread.
What?
And I look at Woody and I say, this is going to be high adventure. And so we're going to hear how somebody calls kangaroos. So he opens up the bags, he steps away from the truck, and he goes, "Here, Roos, here, Roos." And all of a sudden, boom, 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 boom. All these kangaroos come from everywhere and nowhere because we didn't see one as we pulled up. And we realized there's no call. They just recognize his voice because he's done this before.
A real trick.
Yeah, right. So not hard here. There was not any great science involved in this, but it was not the first time we'd been made fools of, though, because the next day we went on another adventure to a little town called Silverton in the outback. And there was, we knew it was way out there because on the way to Silverton, we passed this junkyard full of rusted out vehicles. And as we drew closer, it was all the vehicles in the Mad Max movies out in the desert. Yeah, it's a big chain link fence around it, but you could go in and see these things, but we could pretty much see them from the car. We said, let's carry on here. But so that's how far out we were. It was a Mad Max scene in those famous movies with Mel Gibson.
Well, I thought this involved a bar, but it involved kangaroos and Mad Max machines.
This is all setting up the bar. We get to the town of Silverton.
Here we go, the bar. Okay.
Yeah. Right. And the bar was actually, very, very Western style with the saloon, wooden doors, open air. We go in and go to the bar, and they size us up as tourists. And we said, beer's for each. And she said, the barmaid is looking at us, and she said, recognizing we have two tourists here, says, well, mate, if you want to drink, you've got to join the club. I said, what is the club? She says, I'll show you. She reaches under the bar, and she picks out a funnel and a small potato for each. And in order to join the club, you have to put the potato on your forehead, put the funnel in your belt, and then go like this and drop the potato into the funnel. That's how we joined the club. Woody and I are giving a side eye, like, what is this all about, really? So we say, okay, we'll go. So we put the potato on our head, and we're trying to balance everything. And as we do that, the barmaid takes the 2 beers she poured and pours it down the funnel, drowning our crotches in beers. And she
Deservedly
says,
so.
Yeah, and she says, welcome to the club, gents. And so that was the how we entered the club. And then the little coda onto this story, besides us standing there in the hot Australian sun with wet crotches, was we had to sign the logbook, and put a little comment or whatever. We do that, and she says, you might want to go back 3 or 4 pages. We flip back to 3 or 4 pages, and there was this really obvious signature there. And I said, does that read Mick Jagger?
Really?
And she said, you got it, mate. And I said, oh, anybody wrote that. Then she turns around and points to a photo at the back bar. It's her and Mick Jagger, arm in arm.
Yes.
So it was altogether an astonishing and wonderful treat to get away from Sydney and get back there where the real Aussies live and call you a mate and dampen your crotch. You can't beat an Olympics that includes all those.
Sounds like sports writing to me. Well, this is a great story to start off with, Art, because I think what it does show is the wild and woolly tales of sports writing back in the day when newspapers were flush with money and they were sending scribes all over the place to write. And I remember going on trips thinking, what am I doing here? Like, I can't believe they sent me. I'm some kid from Kentucky and I'm standing in Greece. I'm standing in Olympia, Greece, where the first Olympics were actually held. And here I am to write about it. I know you were there too, right? At the shot put competition at the 2004 Olympics.
Yeah. And I have told people since when they ask me, well, what is your favorite place to go, or what was some physical place? And I've always said that the 2004 Olympics shot put was the most majestic and moving place I've ever been for a sports venue. The original games were begun in a small town called Olympia, which is about a 2-hour bus ride north of Athens, where the Central Games were. And riders could sign up for the bus ride, go up to Olympia and watch this event. And what they did was they took the shot put event out of the typical stadium and put it in the remains of the original Olympic Stadium 3,000 years ago, because there's still a portion of the wall that's remaining.
An arch.
With an arch.
An arch. You can walk underneath it. Yeah.
Right. And what they did was they put it in this giant grass field surrounded by eucalyptus. So we had the sensory feel on a warm but not hot day. And there were thousands of fans who walked from the bus stop through the eucalyptus forest to this field. And all it was a shot put venue with about 2,000 bleacher stands. There was no other stadium.
Right.
But this was the original games. There are still marble strips where the original athletes wrapped their toes around to start the race. And so all of this, to me, as a sports fan and the sports, I lover of sports history, this was absolutely an astonishing experience to be at a venue that was 3,000 years old, and they were still going to use it. The athletes felt the same way. They were just blown away by the privilege of having to compete in this, and this was both men and women. And so we gathered the media site near the bleachers and the event in the middle of the bleachers. And then the competition began, and there was a PA system, and they were announcing each of the competitors. And after about 3 competitors, the public address announcer, in very good English, Greek accent, it says, "Ladies and gentlemen, you are at an Olympics. It is a sports event. It is not church. You are allowed to cheer." And all of a sudden, all of us, including the athletes, erupted in laughter because we were so struck with the majesty, the history, the significance of this thing, and knowing what a privilege it was to be there, that we treated it like church. No, it's a party. So everybody caught on, and it was the most wonderful venue that I've ever been to, because all of that history, all the way we treated it reverentially, and then it became a party.
Right.
And I think everyone who was there would probably have a very similar recollection about this being a very special experience.
Well, that's what sports can do, right? And as a writer who got to travel and cover so many things, obviously we're going to talk a lot about the Pacific Northwest, where you know everything, but it also took you all over the place. It took you to Olympia, and it took you to so many things: Super Bowls, World Series, NBA Finals, golf majors, and it also took you to things that were just flat out crazy. And I know a lot of writers have told me there was nothing like covering a major championship fight, especially in Las Vegas. And you had the privilege of that, as well as going to Olympia. But you were there on one certain night I wanted to ask you about. June 28th, 1997, the MGM Grand in Vegas. We have Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield, the rematch. And there was some boxing, and then there was some biting. What was it like there, Art, to be ringside for one of the most notorious nights in boxing history?
It was the most astonishing event I've ever been to, from a standpoint not only of an absence of physical safety, but the things that went on after the fight was over, which was actually more compelling than the ear bite that Tyson laid on Holyfield, that will never be forgotten by any sports fans who heard about it or seen it. I was about 10 rows back in the press area watching the fight, and the announcement of the decision that Tyson was disqualified and that Holyfield was a winner caused a huge eruption within the arena. And people began throwing things from the top rows and middle rows and coming down on the press table. And so we were in some immediate jeopardy. In front of us, people were throwing chairs into the ring.
Wow.
And it was total chaos. There must have been 100 people in the ring to protect the fighters, to separate the fighters, and to protect everybody else who was being pelted by the fans.
And let's not forget, you're trying to write on deadline.
Well, this was the one break I had. In those days, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, where I worked, did not have a Sunday paper. This was Saturday night. So I had some free time. And this was really kind of important in the story because everything kept devolving. Once the decision was announced and they had enough security people around both fighters to escort them out of the ring and into the entryway towards the locker room, people kept throwing things. And as Tyson passed through the opening, somebody about 20 or 30 feet above him from the grandstand threw some liquid, probably a beer, and splashed him. Tyson broke away from his security people and started climbing the wall because it was a fabric curtain. And then he finally got up to the rail to go after the fan. And and the security guys finally grabbed him by the ankles and told him, Mike, you got to come down. You can't do this. And they managed to pull Tyson away from presumably killing the fan. So they got him back into the locker room, and then came the press conferences, which were almost as outrageous, with everybody in in semi-hysterics with hyperbolic gestures and carrying on. And then it got weird. Yeah. I just fell into the company of a guy standing next to me who happened to be David Remnick, who's now the editor of the New Yorker. And Remnick and I were just sort of exchanging, holy cows, holy shit, all what was going on. And we walked back from the press conferences, from the locker room through the mall that separates the locker room from the arena, because we left our gear back there. And as we walked through, the casino in front of us, which is adjacent to a shopping mall that connects the two spaces, and it's all Gucci and Versace and all these fancy clothes. The casino suddenly explodes with hundreds of people running out of the casino to safety somewhere. And Remnick and I pin ourselves back against a shopping mall window. All the shopping mall, the shops were all closed. These people blow by us and think, what has happened in the casino? And then there's a pause. No one's moving. And suddenly police show up with their guns out like this. And they're following the crowd.
Wow.
And so we can't get ourselves pinned back far enough into the wall. And we thought, what is going on? And so after the cops pass chasing the crowd, we decide to walk into the casino. And it's empty. Not a person. Have you ever seen an empty casino? It doesn't exist. It's not possible.
I've seen an empty wallet, mine, but not an empty casino.
Strewn all over the floors were upended stools in front of slot machines and popcorn and cigarettes and ashes. And it was just a total mess. And there were coins everywhere on the floor. And Remnick and I are wandering in this empty casino, the only two people. And he finally says, hey, I got to go. I got a deadline. So
right. That's what's so beautiful about this. You still have to think about how you're going to write.
Yeah. Where's your lead here?
Yeah.
And so he departed. So I had the casino to myself. So I'm walking another, maybe another 50, 60 feet. And I finally see somebody. And it's this casino worker, probably a croupier. And she's sitting on a chair trying to light her cigarette and doing this. She's shaking.
So nervous.
Yeah. And her hands are both shaking. And I come over to her and I say, hey, can you tell me what's going on? What happened? So she proceeds to tell me the story about the second floor high rollers area where all of the, privileged VIPs go to gamble. Apparently, according to her, the Holyfield entourage and the Tyson entourage began arguing over the same things that everybody was arguing with in the country. Only one of them somehow smuggled in a gun and started firing. And this is her story. And apparently it drifted down into their first floor. And I said, I can't believe this happened. Can you tell me anything about it? And she points to a wall about 20 feet away. And she said, they shot into that wall. And so I excused myself and I'm looking around the wall and there's a bullet hole in the wall. And I knew it was a bullet hole because I could smell the sulfur.
Wow.
And so I spent the next several hours on the phone. This was, 97, so we're not having Google as our friend. There wasn't any of that. And I had to make phone calls. And the long story short, I could not get anyone in the Las Vegas Police Department or the casinos to confirm anything because they do not want future gamblers to ever think a gun could get into the premises of a casino.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, what were the noises that people heard? Because everybody heard gunshots. And they said it was somebody dropping a champagne bottle on marble. I said, 20 champagne bottles on marble?
Yeah. Wow.
And then the next excuse came up that it was one of those metal stanchions with the ropes between them to segregate lines of people. So somebody knocked over a stanchion onto marble. And I realized that ended the conversation. They weren't going to help me anymore. And so I wrote about that because that was the most astonishing aspect of this event is that it broke into a gunfight in the casino. And to this day, I don't think anybody who wasn't there will believe the story. But there's one final twist on all of this. I did find somebody who did see some security camera footage of the second floor. And they said that all the tables were knocked over and all the chips were on the ground. I said, well, what did you see there? And the guy says, well, it was somebody that a lot of people knew was picking up the chips. I said, who was that? And he says, Gary Payton.
Oh, no. The Sonics guard.
Yeah.
No, now you got a local angle in Seattle.
It was amazing. Because I couldn't trust that independently and I couldn't find Gary. I didn't write it, but I'm willing to tell you now that Gary made a profit on the evening, I think. But
did you ever ask Gary about that later?
No, I would. He had been. He was. Well, I think he was still playing then, but I never did catch up to him to ask about that because maybe I'm going to save it for the book and see if Gary can find. Will confess to making a handsome profit on the evening.
I never heard Gary Payton, the glove, was picking up.
Now you know why they call him the gloves there.
Exactly. Well, I'm glad you brought up Gary Payton because I wanted to talk basketball with you. During your career, it's been such a big part of your writing. You even played basketball too, right? In college?
I was slow and couldn't jump, but yes.
Well, yeah, you're the same as me, but you got a scholarship.
Well, I was a little taller. Maybe that was the advantage.
But you did. You played at Pacific Lutheran University.
Mm-hmm.
You graduated in 1975. and you started your journalism career out there in the Pacific Northwest, right at the time when the NBA was just really, really, as we were talking about, going crazy with Blazer Mania. And 1977, when the Trailblazers won the NBA title, you're a young writer at the time. I have seen a photo of you interviewing a young Bill Walton, and this is back when Walton was stuttering.
Right. Yeah, that was.
Now we can't shut him up, but this is how long ago this was. He was a stutterer at the time.
Yeah, and he was obviously this at that. He was such an iconoclast. It was a very very liberal, very left wing, and very politicized guy. He was always talking about the typical left-wing issues of corporate dominance and oppression and all of these things. And he had the hair and the ponytail went down between his shoulder blades, and so. But he fit in well with Portland, and he fit in well with Seattle, and he certainly fit in well with the basketball world. And so that photo came when he and I had a session alone, and it was a fortunate little encounter because there was nobody else. I don't think Bill in those days liked crowds. One-on-one, he was great. The stutter was not evident. And it was such a great experience because I was pretty young and Bill was, I think the best basketball player of that middle 70s era. And certainly he led Blazers to a championship. But
why do you think that, Art? Why do you think he was the best at that time?
Because he had such command of the game as a center. You just don't see that very often. And the thing about it was that at least in my view, when he had the ball in his hands, it's a whole lot like Jokic now for Denver. He had a great command of the floor. He had a sense about where every player was going to be in a couple of strides and was able to play high post, low post. There wasn't a three-point line yet, but he could square up and shoot an 18-footer without a problem. And he was so quick and shrewd about how he manipulated himself. It was just an astonishing thing. I'm afraid that kind of center, it seemed like, was lost to history until Jokic has come along and sort of reintroduced what a big man can do, and when he's not confined to a stereotype low post. And Bill was just way ahead, and people think that Jokic is, we've never seen this before. And with the exception of the three-point shot, we did see it before. It was Bill Walton. And I'm just so sorry that he had what turned out to be 46 separate orthopedic operations.
Oh, man. It's just incredible. Wow.
Yeah, fix his 46. Feet. And fix his feet, his hips, his knees. And yet, now that he's had a second life, a new career as a very colorful, cantankerous, and irrepressible broadcaster. He's now... he's the guy that I think is such a throwback. People are kind of remembering his career or looking up the video and developing a fresh appreciation about it. But he was one of one in terms of middle 70s basketball. And I think if his body had held up, he would be right there with Wilt, Bill Russell as the best big men ever.
Well, all right, so you got Walton in 77 with those Blazers that just ignited the whole Pacific Northwest. And then right around the same time, you move over to Seattle in 1980, and that's a year after the Sonics won the NBA championship.
Right.
So for you as a young writer and who played basketball in college, that had to be really special. What kind of memories do you have as a journalist in that era of the NBA when Portland and Seattle were at the center of the basketball universe?
Right. It was a really intense competitive relationship. And Lenny Wilkens was the coach of the Sonics in the title year. Jack Ramsey coached the Blazers then. The two of them had a lot of mutual respect, but it was it was tense between the Blazers, the Sonics, and each had had an opportunity for a title. So, everybody thought this was going to continue. Well, no. The 1980 Sonics fell apart. And so there was a doldrums until the early 90s when George Karl was hired, Gary Payton was drafted, and Sean Kemp was drafted. And then the lid blew off the town.
At the old Key Arena, those were some rocking days back then. They had the best record in the NBA one year. They set a franchise record the next year. Well, they were 64-18, but they just couldn't quite get it done in the playoffs. What was that team like to be around as a journalist?
It was so much fun. It was the most fun I've ever had covering a team because it was a crisis every day. There was always some controversy. There was always some drama backstage and tension between everyone because George Karl, I think he's a wonderful coach, but he's also extraordinarily neurotic. And I remember talking to him. I was at the Sonics practice facility one day. He walked out about the same time I did. And I had written something he didn't like. And so we started hashing it out on the curb. And I noticed that from the second floor windows of the practice facility with level blinds, there were people opening the blinds, looking out on the conversation between George and I, thinking, this is going to come to blows and we're going to have a terrible cover story on A1 of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, coach hits sports writer. It didn't quite get there, but I do remember talking to George and I said, George, I'm going to violate a protocol here in the journalism, and I want to offer you a thought, and you can do with it what you want. Stop your newspaper subscriptions. Turn off the radio. Do not watch TV. All of these media distractions are undercutting your attention span. Just concentrate on coaching the guys,
How did he react?
He looked at me and he took a deep breath and he said, I can't do it. He had to know what everybody was thinking and saying. And I'll never forget it because he was trying to be angry, but he all of a sudden had this kind of self-awareness and he shared it with me. And as startled as I was, I eventually found it kind of endearing. Because the other side of George at that time was so volatile. And there was such tension between him and Gary Payton and really Sean Kemp. And there was other guys who were solid, salt of the earth type guys like Detlef Schrempf and Sam Perkins, Hersey Hawkins. And they were all great personalities, but the tension was just so remarkable. I asked one of George's top assistants at the time, Dwayne Casey, who's gone on to be a head coach around the league, and I really respected the guy. And I said, I got to ask you, Dwayne, how is it that George and Gary can work it out to get this craziness to the NBA Finals? And Casey, big grin, starts laughing. Says, I'll tell you. He said, Gary thinks George is crazy enough to kill him. And he laughed and he walked away.
Oh, they did get to the finals too in '96. I mean, they lost in 6 games to the Jordan Bulls.
Yeah.
So they almost got over the hump. They just couldn't quite do it.
They had, and I think a part of this was this dramatic tension because I think there was a 4 or 5 year period where the Sonics averaged 60 wins a season.
They were 63-19, best record in the league in 93-94, and then they lost in the first round to Denver.
First number 1 seed to lose to a number 8 seed. Dikembe Mutombo disrupted them, but that's the kind of tightrope the Sonics walked under George Karl. There was just so much craziness going on, and there was an episode at one of the playoff games, I think it was 94, it might have been 95, where Gary, Big Paper Daddy, I'm forgetting his first name, Pierce, got an argument with Gary on the floor before halftime. And according to reliable sources who were eyewitnesses, Pierce pulled a gun on Gary in the locker room.
Oh, come on. Well, after the casino story you told, I'm starting to rethink this.
We're going deep here. Nothing ever came of that. And Ricky Pierce, there we go. And Ricky Pierce and Gary passed it up. They went on to success together, and that's just how they rolled. And
wow. It was a crazy train, right? It just was like nonstop, something going on. I mean, didn't the Sonics owner, Barry Ackerley, there was something about he was so mad at you that he wanted to get you like arrested or something.
Yes, right? He did. Like I told you, it went all the way up to the owner. I'd written in the same era, late 90s, there was already discussion about replacing the Kingdome, upgrading the Key Arena, which had already been upgraded 10 years earlier. Or no, I'm sorry. It was needing upgrades, and the owner, Barry Ackerley, who made his money with billboards throughout Seattle, he wanted a new facility, and he wanted the city to pay for it. He wanted it on property he owned that was right next to the Kingdome in South Seattle. And I thought the proposal in many ways was sort of dubious, but the taxpayer was going to get stuck with the bill. And I wrote my skepticism, and I said in a column, I'd rather sleep in a bed of broken light bulbs than make a deal with Barry Ackerley.
That's a pretty good line.
Well, I thought it was until I found out that when that appeared in the paper, Ackerley had his entire family in town for a wedding of his daughter. So there were people coming up.
Exposure.
So they're coming up to Barry. Hey, what's this mean man saying in the paper? What's the deal here? So I didn't know about the wedding until a long time later. What I did find out was that Barry sought revenge by planning to have me arrested at the NBA draft, which was going to be held in a downtown Seattle ballroom at that time. They were going to gather the media and fans and, big draft day party kind of thing.
What was he going to have you arrested for?
Well, according to the Seattle beat cop who was in charge of Sonic security that I just got to know real casually, he called me up and told me what the plan was. He said that they were going to have a public area with fans and media, and they were going to have a private area where there was just going to be only media, and you had to show your credential to get into this curtained off room in this hotel ballroom. And as soon as I was to step off from the public space to the private space, Barry was going to have me arrested for trespassing.
I thought it was going to be crimes against journalism.
Well, that case is still pending, so don't encourage anybody. You might be on the jury. And so the cop just wanted to avoid a scene. And, and I said, well, thank you very much. And so I went to tell my boss, hey, I found this out. I could be in jail tomorrow at the draft. And my boss started laughing and he said, hey, take a toothbrush. It'll be good for you.
It's got good Wi-Fi in here. Can you file us a column?
Yeah. Well, in 97, all I needed was electricity and didn't need Wi-Fi. So
that's right.
The word had, I didn't say anything to anybody because I didn't really think this was going to happen. But the day of the NBA draft, I was approached by the panicky PR director and said, Art, I think you know what's going to happen here. And I said, no, maybe not. And he said, look, we don't want this to happen. We can't deal with this potential embarrassment to have a sports writer arrested. So he said, anybody you want, the coach, the general manager, the scouts, the players, anybody you want, we're going to bring him to wherever you're sitting in this public area. And I said, I don't want to be treated any differently. And he said, please, it's my job. So I kind of realized that there was going to be collateral damage in this thing beyond, me having to spend a night with a toothbrush in the jail. And so I said, okay, I'll go along with this. And so this never got public. Where it got public was the following fall when media credentials for the season were issued by each team per NBA rules. So I came to the, I tried to get my season ticket or my season credentials early, but they said, well, there's a hang up, Art. We can't do that yet. And wait till the game. We'll hand about it to the game.
I smell a rat.
Yes. Well, I showed up with my colleague, rival, and friend, Steve Kelly of the Seattle Times.
Great writer, yeah.
And so we didn't walk in together, but we were there at the same time when the PR guy for the Sonics at the time said, well, guys, your seats are a little different. Oh, yeah? Where are they? Well, they're at the top of the catwalk over the center of the floor, 120 feet above the courtside. I said, are you kidding me? He said, well, look, just for one game. Can you just do this for one game? So I said, well, and Steve and I looked at each other. We both shrugged and said, okay, one game, what the heck? So we have to walk up to the top of the grandstand and then walk on a catwalk to the center court because that's where the scoreboard over the state, is supported.
You and Steve are walking across the catwalk
and
there's the roof.
There's a 3x6 table with two chairs there where there are names scrawled on a piece of paper.
Did you actually sit there the entire game?
We did. We did because it actually was a view that neither of us had. Neither of us was scared of heights. And we said, this is going to be a pretty good story. And so the game's over, we do our thing, and we didn't write anything about it because we were begged again not to say anything. And long story short, this went back to the NBA front office in New York. And Ackerley was trying to say, it's my building and it's my team. I can decide who can come in. And they said, the NBA changed its bylaws on the spot to say that no media member can be denied the customary courtesies, including seating, because of something the media member may have written or broadcast. And I was told, and I don't have any evidence, but Brian McIntyre would probably back it up. He said, in the NBA bylaws, the operational manual, there is the Art Thiel rule. You've heard of the Larry Bird rule, the Larry Bird rights? Well,
yes.
I was deeply honored that I might have a rule named after me. So anyway, I got my season credentials. I got the normal seats. David Stern said, Barry, this is not a fight that's worth even bothering with. So stop it.
Well, now what's funny is now they do have the media sitting up at a catwalk.
Yeah, well, yeah. As it turned out, I was just a man ahead of my time, I guess. Because, there's no floor seating. There's no any of those things anymore. And if you can just get in the building, because they can sell your seat for $5,000 a game.
Right.
So, it's a big change, but it was kind of a hilarious moment that I'm sure Barry Ackerley, bless his soul, not with us anymore, but I'm sure he remembers it well.
And I'm sure our listeners will too. That's a tremendous story. Well, those were crazy days back then with the Sonics, and they left. They left Seattle, and they head over to Oklahoma City after the 2008 season ended. And there was another team in Seattle that almost left, and that's the Mariners.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you about this, especially one particular season. In 1995, they were having a typical Seattle season. They had never won a division. They'd only had like 2 winning seasons since the birth of the franchise in 77. Griffey was hurt. Ken Griffey Jr. had broken his wrist. He missed like 73 games or something. And then out of the blue, they go on a run at a time when the talk was they might leave town. Now, Art, you went back and you wrote the definitive book about that season, Out of Left Field, How the Mariners Made Baseball Fly in Seattle. As a writer, a journalist who was there every day, what was it like to chronicle that magic run that Seattle Mariners went on in 1995?
Well, it was incredibly tense because every game had a significance well beyond the outcome or the impact on the pennant race. The future of the franchise was at stake because the Mariner ownership had made clear that they had to have a new ballpark to replace the Kingdome because in 1994, the Orioles debuted the Park at Camden Yards that became the template for a whole new generation of ballparks. And that's what they want. The ownership wanted that. This group bought the team in 92 and realized that the only way to make this team financially viable is with a similar park. So they arranged to have a measure put on the ballot in September of 95 that would increase the King County sales tax by some small percentage to fund the building of a baseball-specific park. And eventually became then Safeco Field, now T-Mobile Park. The building was a great success, but it was very controversial at the time because Seattle fans were notoriously tight about giving tax dollars for pro sports. Mm-hmm. And so that became clear that the Mariners in 95 had to have some on-field success to build some momentum because they were the slowest team to reach a 500 season in North American pro sports history. It took them 15 years to get to 500. So pathos reigned in the community, and the Mariners had to give fans some emotional reason to support them. So the Mariners then began a run in August of 95 with this vote coming up September 15th or something. And they won an incredible amount of games with, they had Griffey and Randy Johnson and Edgar Martinez and Jay Buhner, Dan Wilson. And this team really got hot. They were a good group of guys. They had a 60-second ad they played for ticket sales on TV. And the theme was, you got to love these guys. And it really worked because the guy they most loved, besides Griffey, was the manager, Lou Piniella. Right. And Lou was just a great, almost mythic figure here in Seattle because of what he did. And he managed to push all the buttons right to get the team in contention And on the day of the vote in Seattle on this measure, the Mariners won a critical game against the Angels with a home run by the aptly named Doug Strange. And his home run was the critical one to get the Mariners ahead of the Angels. Eventually, they won, or they got the wild card berth. And that game and that series and the whole 95 playoffs generated enough emotional and political momentum that it overcame a poll defeat. That measure lost by 1,000 votes out of 500,000 cast. But the governor, the King County executive, and the mayor did not want to be the one that have the Mariners leave town.
Right.
So they put together a special session of the state legislature with a different funding mechanism. They got it passed, and the Mariners then made the playoffs and beat the Yankees in an epic 3-2 wild card series. That was the first time the Yankees had been to the playoffs in 14 years.
Wow.
And it was great because, and then I think the anecdote that I enjoyed the most out of that story was the first game at Yankee Stadium was incredibly rowdy. People throwing things on the field and controversial calls and just this incredible tension. Of course, Lou Piniella, the great Yankee player, was back in town with the Mariners. And so there was another layer of sentimentality and competitiveness. And George Steinbrenner was the owner. And the outfield bleachers and right field were always catcalling Junior and Buhner in the outfield, making fun of them. They were throwing things at them, and including coins. And as Buhner took his position before innings, he would look around him and he would go pick up the coins and he would stuff them into the folds of his glove. And I could see him out there, and I said, after the game, I came up, I said, "What the hell are you doing with those coins?" He said, "When the riot breaks out, I'm running out of here, and I want to make sure I have coins for the subway."
Wise man. I mean, you think about it, Seattle, the Mariners were 12 and a half games back on August 24th, and they were stormed back to tie the Angels. They beat them in a one-game playoff at the Kingdome. Then, like you said, they beat the Yankees in that epic series. They lost to ALCS to Cleveland. But that season literally saved baseball in Seattle.
Yeah. And Lou put it best. He said in the Game 5 finale of the Yankees series, Edgar Martinez hit this famous double that scored Griffey from first base to win the game. And Lou said that was the hit, the run, the game, the series, and the season that saved baseball in Seattle.
With all that in mind, that 95 season, saving baseball, and like you said, leading really to the NFL team, the Seahawks getting a new stadium even, when you think about the trickle-down effect. It really all gets back to Ken Griffey Jr. in some way, right?
Yes, it does, because his impact on baseball was immense nationally. And here, it was hyper beyond belief, because he was the first true homegrown hero for the Mariners. And his stardom was so magnified on the national scene because of the smile, the talent, and his willingness to engage people. Sometimes it wasn't always that way, but clearly there were some tense times with Junior too, because he could be pretty impetuous and contrarian at times. But clearly he was the difference maker in saving the franchise, starting with his debut in '89 through the 1999 season. And that really was a difference maker in terms of the embrace.
As a voice of Seattle, the guy who wrote columns during that era of Griffey's apex of his career, what was it like for a writer to write about somebody who is having that type of impact that goes really beyond sports.
Well, it was, speaking for myself, I enjoyed Griffey immensely for all the obvious reasons that anyone would. But I was also willing to do the give and take with him. And when he would come in with, some kind of snarky remark, I would fire back. And we both understood that well enough to give each other grief without it leading into something unpleasant. I do recall a phone call. I put a call into Griffey about something, and I said, I really need to hear from you. And a day later, the call came back to my home number from Griffey at the golf course. My wife answered the phone. This is pre-cell phone. My wife answered the phone, and he says, is this Art's wife? And she said, yes. And he said, why did you marry him?
That's a pretty good line by Junior.
Well, it was. And we carried that banter throughout his time here, including afterwards, because I think it was the year that he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. The announcement was, he was, I think, unanimous, near unanimous now, but the team had scheduled a press conference for Safeco Field to have him talk about everything. And just before that happened, Sports Illustrated came out with a story on Griffey, a big feature, put him on the cover. Mm-hmm. And the cover, I thought, was ridiculous because they showed him swinging a bat in a house. I guess it was his house. I don't remember. And he was dressed in this sky blue suit with big window pane panels on it. And the way as he was captured swinging the bat, it kind of bunched up on him. It looked terrible. And so Griffey shows up to the press conference and he sees me, he rolls his eyes, as he often did when he saw me. And I said to him, hey, I have a question about that cover on Sports Illustrated there with you in the suit swinging the bat. Did you lose a bet? And Griffey looks at me and he said, the only magazine that's going to put you on its cover is National Geographic. I said, well, Griffey wins that one.
Well, you got to give it up for him.
Yeah, I mean, that was fun for me because Griffey could give it, he could take it, and, it was just, most people were in awe of him, but I got over that the first year, and he was just a guy that I could go up, talk to in the clubhouse, and, he'd blow me off or something, and I said, he says something like, not today, and I said, well, I'll be back here tomorrow, come up with something better than that. That kind of banter. And I think a lot of writers probably have had that kind of relationship with a central figure in one of the sports teams, whether it's football, baseball, basketball, whatever. And that's something I've always enjoyed. I mean, I don't think I'd ever call, or he wouldn't call me a close friend, or I wouldn't, and I don't get into friendships with players or coaches or whatever.
Right. You're not there to be anybody's friend. You're a journalist.
Yeah. And so I was completely comfortable with giving him grief and taking it in return. Every month I get my National Geographic and I look at the cover and I'm not there. Griffey wins that one 1-0.
Well, you mentioned a guy, we're going to wrap this up, and we didn't really even get into the NFL, but before we leave, you mentioned a guy that I also had dealings with, and I dealt with Griffey when he was with the Reds, and I'd be down in Cincinnati writing, so I know what you're talking about in terms of his relationship with the media. But another guy I also dealt with before he got to Seattle was Lou Piniella. Mm-hmm. I was working in Cincinnati when Lou was the manager of the Reds and led them to the 90 championship. And like you said, he was the guy who pushed all the buttons in that 95 season. And Lou is one of my favorites to ever be around because he was just so unpredictable, but also just great to deal with. I found it was like he could blow up at you one day, but he could also just, talk with you about anything the next. What type of working relationship did you have with Lou Piniella, who lasted, by the way, 10 years in Seattle? That's a long time for a guy like that. How did you get along with Lou?
He mentioned that, and after his decision to move to Tampa, I was alone in his office, and he was, typical Lou. He was in his underwear with socks and about 3 cigarettes going on the ashtray at the same time.
Yes.
and he goes, 10 years. Who'd have thought that? Not me. How the hell did I get to 10 years here? And
good question.
Yeah. And it was really, he was such an object, such a figure of endearment, I think, to most everybody in Seattle. His, tantrums are legendary, and every baseball blooper reel has got Lou throwing a base or kicking his hat or something like that. But there was a lot of substance to Lou, and it came out in the affection that the players had for him and how they dealt with him. And, he could obviously be rough and tough. And I had one episode with Lou that really sort of sold me on him. In the year that they were scheduled to move into the new Safeco Field ballpark, it was going to be a totally transformative baseball experience because it'll be outdoors in the cold air of the Northwest in April, May, and June.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to really deaden the flight of the ball. And that's one of the reasons Griffey wound up in Cincinnati, was because he knew that his pursuit of any career home run records was really going to be hurt by going to the outdoor field at Safeco instead of the indoor park at the Kingdome. And the Mariners had a real disappointing season prior to that, largely because Lou hated pitchers.
Oh, yes. Yeah, legendary for that.
Yeah, and he was a hitter. He just congenitally hated pitchers. And I remember there was one episode where he got furious with somebody, one of his relief pitchers on the mound, and after 3 pitches, 2 hits, Lou's stomping out to the mound. And before Lou gets even to the mound, the pitcher says, "Lou, I'm trying." And then Lou gets up there and he sweeps his arm through towards the stadium. He says, "Trying? I can get an effing truck driver to try."
I can hear that voice right now.
And so getting back to the stadium switch, I wrote a column that said, Lou Piniella and general manager Woody Woodward had to go because Lou was not going to be the manager for a pitcher-friendly ballpark that was hurting his hitters.
Mm.
So I make a rule when I do something to piss somebody off, I show up as soon as I can to face the music, because I think that's what sports writers who call people out, they should be able to do it and let the subject say what they want to your face. And so I showed up for the game the next day, and the first question was, "Hey, Lou, somebody says you're supposed to get fired," or words to that effect. And Lou said, yeah, I know the guy. We'll talk. And he's looking right at me. And so I said, "Well, let's meet up." And I didn't engage, and Lou didn't want to engage before the game with me. So after the game, I said, "Well, where would you like to talk?" And it happened that the Mariners were flying to Oakland. And I was flying to Oakland for a subsequent Seahawks-Raiders game. And I said, "Why don't we meet at the Coliseum?" And he says, "Okay." Lou and I make a date in the visitors' manager's office. And I go in and we talk for 45 minutes.
Really?
Yeah. And his voice gets high and mine, I'm starting to talk about it. And I'm getting a little angry. But at the end of the 45 minutes, he sticks his hand out and shakes mine, says, "Good talk." And I thought, wow. As I go to open the door, I pull it open, and every beat writer is leaning up against the door, and it's like falling like a cartoon, falling into Lou's office because they were dying to hear what was going on. And so, long story short, obviously they did fire Woody Woodward that winter, and he kept Lou, as we all know. And Lou said something to me after when I saw him at spring training the next year, and he said, I said something about, well, looks like my influence isn't very good. You're still here, And he laughed and he said, sometimes I can be wrong, and sometimes you can be right. And he said, I understood your point because I try to understand people I respect. And that was one of the biggest compliments I'd ever received in the old sports writing Dodge. And we shook hands again. And that was, I thought, I mentioned that not because Lou was flattering me, but because it reflects on his humanity, that Lou can be tempestuous, can be confrontational. He can be just out of control sometimes. But he can forget it, and he can forgive it. And all of us, I think, in Seattle for those great 10 years, understood that that's how Lou operated. And it was a part of his success because Lou could be himself. And as difficult as those moments were, he was gracious, warm, sincere, and really a guy that everybody gave great affection to because he was ultimately so respectful, even if he was furious for 10 seconds or 2 minutes or 45 minutes sometimes. And that's one of the reasons I think he's one of my all-time favorite people to cover in sports.
Well, Art, this has been just a tremendous conversation. I really, really have enjoyed your stories. We've been all over the place, some great laughs, but also some poignant moments. And I'll leave you with this final question. When people say to you, what was it like to be a sports writer? What do you think of?
Well, I sometimes rely on the words of Broadway playwright Stephen Sondheim when something funny happened on the way to the Forum, wrote in a lyric, something appealing and something appalling. Because there was so much to like about the job, from the interactions and of my colleagues like you, the players, the coaches, the owners. There was an intensity, a dynamic that I really enjoyed for the longest time. And the appalling part was at an Olympics and trying to write a story on a laptop when the Japanese photographer on the other seat falls asleep on your shoulder.
That sounds like personal experience.
Yes, it does. So, and then the one thing, the only thing that probably I'm glad to be done with the business is the need to be on scan 24/7. If you're a daily journalist, that's your job. You've got to pay attention to everything all the time, especially as a columnist, because, we have to cover multiple teams on multiple subjects. And that really is an intensity over time. You don't notice day to day, but incrementally, that daily journalism gig is hard on all of us. Now, that's a first world problem. I'm not complaining. I'm not, lamenting about it, but it is something that once I'm not dealing with that, I feel light. I feel, something appealing instead of something appalling. So it was great to be part of it. It's great to be beyond it now. And I savor all the memories, and this has been a real opportunity to share a few with you and the viewers.
Well, thanks a lot, Art. Thanks for listening to Press Box Access. You can find us here with a new episode every other Wednesday. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. We'd love for you to review us. 5 stars would be nice. Follow us on social media. Drop us an email at pressboxaccess@gmail.com. And be sure to spread the word. Everyone is welcome here.
This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to executive producers Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando, producer Bill Huffman, and our audio engineer, Nathan Corson. I'm your host, Todd Jones. It's closing time. Rock on.
Hey there, my name is Michael Laminato, and this is Pit Pass F1, a brand new podcast that'll take you closer to the action of the world's most prestigious motorsport. From Monaco to Miami and Australia to Azerbaijan, Pit Pass F1 is on the ground and has you covered. Esteemed F1 journalists Julianne Cerasoli and Chris Medland will take you inside the sport every round. They'll keep you up to date with the latest news breaking in Formula One and the most influential views shaping the world of Grand Prix racing. Every Friday, we'll be bringing you a track guide and race preview, and Chris and Ju will be in your feed every morning from Saturday through to Monday to keep you up to date on all the day's action on and off the track. So if you want to be in the know on the latest in Formula One, subscribe wherever you get your favourite podcasts and visit us at evergreenpodcasts.com. Pit Pass F1, a brand new show for Evergreen Podcasts.